Welcome back to Kelly the Kilted Therapist. All right, so as you may have noticed from the intro, I'm going to be talking about Finnegan's Wake. This is from the 1939 James Joyce novel. And you might be thinking, what does that have to do with therapy, Kelly? I know that you like Celtic stuff, but seriously, what does this have to do with anything? Finnegan's Wake is a wonderful way for us to examine grief, anxiety, loss, and ritual, and basically look at it in the context of how do we manage the difficult things. So I'm going to read real quick. This will go fast. Again, this is James Joyce writing in 1939 about Finnegan's Wake. I wanted to play the Darby version, where they give the commentary in between the lyrics of the song. If you get an opportunity, go over to YouTube and check that out. So it starts out, well, you know Anne Olivia. Yes, of course, we all know Anne Olivia. Tell me all, tell me now. You'll die when you hear. Well, when the old cheb went foot and did what you know. Yes, I know. Go on. Wash, quit, and don't be dabbling. Tuck up your sleeves and loosen your talk tapes. And don't butt me, hike, when you bend. Or whatever it was they thread to make out. He thried to two in the fiendish park. He's an awful old rep. Look at the shirt of him. Look at the dirt of it all. He has all my water black on me. And it's steeping and stooping since this time last week. How many goes it? I wonder. I washed it. I know by heart the places he likes to sail. Dooderty, devil, scorching my hand and starving my famine to make his private linen public. Wallop it well with your battle and clean it. My wrists are rusty rubbing the mouldy stains, and the neepers of wet and the gangers of sin in it. Now, if you're having trouble following along, let me see if I can explain something. This is an old form of kind of Irish Gaelic mixed with English. Essentially, this is somebody who's gossiped about this guy because he's a bit of a fair drinker. And I want you to notice something about this. When we are engaged with people and we're talking about them, how do we talk about them? We have a tendency to kind of paint a picture of people with words. And that's really what James is doing here. He says, you know this woman, and everybody says, yeah, of course we know her. And then he says, but do you know the old cheb? Her old man, the guy that she was running around with. Put your sleeves up, loosen your talk tapes, and don't butt me. When he says hike, he means pull up your pants when you bend over. Or whatever it was they threed to make out. He thried to 2 a.m. is really what he's saying. So he was out drinking and he got really drunk. Apparently this was an ongoing thing. And it says, how many goes it, I wonder? I washed it. I know by heart the places he likes. And he calls him a devil. Here's the thing. Irish culture is a little bit different than American culture. And if you know much about particularly the latter part of the 1800s, early part of the 1900s in Ireland, there was a lot going on in that culture. Death was rampant. And when we look at death from the perspective of what it teaches us about what it means to be alive, I think it also makes stories like this really important to us. And again, this is just my opinion, but when you think about it, it's great that, when we're talking about the people that we care about or whatever way we care about people, whatever we're doing, we're keeping their memory alive. We're, so to speak, telling their story. Now, it might be from our perspective. It may be from somebody else's that we heard, while we were out doing whatever we were doing, or maybe heard it down at the pub. I don't know. But again, it's a wonderful way for us to kind of poke a little bit of fun at something that is often a really difficult subject. When I was backpacking in the mid-1990s, I knew a couple that did missionary work over in the northern part of Tibet. And one of the things that we talked about one afternoon while we were hiking were death rituals. What does it mean to die? And I think this is a very, very difficult subject for a lot of people. In fact, when I was a patrol officer, my first year on the job, I saw 19 homicides. Well, I shouldn't say I saw 19 homicides. What I saw personally was I had 19 unattended deaths, which by definition legally they're homicides. These are people who died unattended or died attended but circumstances hadn't been determined by the time I got there. I was also witness to a few people in the process of dying. And throughout my career, that has happened. In fact, I held a young man's hand after he'd been shot at a gang shooting. And 15-year-old kid squeezing my hand, telling me I don't want to die. That leaves an impression on you. Now, I had a couple of early experiences of my own with death. When I was about 9 years old, my grandparents lived with us in the downstairs part of my parents' house. And my grandfather had suffered a stroke. So he was, for all intents and purposes, limited in his ability to move physically. He had difficulty with his speech, but my grandmother loved this man so dearly that 3 years later she died of a broken heart. That's a testament to love, but it's also a testament to the way that we grieve and the way that we interpret death. And that's another reason why I kind of wanted to talk about this with people, because let's face it, the last 4 years has been really hard for a lot of people. And sometimes we need to take a look at the perspective of death. And I'm using Perspectives on Psychology. This is an old book with an introduction by Ira Cohen. But the brilliance of this is when he talks about not just emotions, but when he talks about the spirit of the body and our perceptions. There's also a chapter in here, because this book is actually a collaboration of several people who contributed. But a guy named Jose Delgado in chapter 4 started by talking about what the brain is. Now, we can reduce the brain down to simple electrical neurochemical actions taking place inside of a corpus. Jose says he's an eminent neurobiologist who's done pioneer work in implanting electrodes and miniaturized radio transmitter receivers in the brains of cats, monkeys, and men. And in this particular piece that he put into the book, he differentiates between the brain as an organ and the mind as a group of functions. He describes the research of electrostimulation in the brain and then the limitations of direct control of the brain. But why this is important to us is because I want us to understand something. Often people will come into my therapy room and they'll say, my brain did that. And I ask, was your brain a part of you? Was it under your control? Now, admittedly, that sounds facetious. I'm not intending that to be facetious. If we think about our focus and we think about the way that we interpret our world, sometimes we can feel as though we are outside watching us talking to other people. Believe it or not, the DSM has a word for that too, derealization. And if it gets bad enough, depersonalization as a cope strategy for overwhelm. But when we think about the mind and the way that it functions, particularly when it comes to sadness, grief, and loss, this is what I want us to pay attention to. The mind has its own local functions and also functions intimately associated with the cardiovascular system, the digestive system, everything. Now, if you've seen any of the other videos that I've done talking about this, particularly in terms of emotion and the unconscious, you've heard me talk about the body as a system. Grief impacts this system. Now, the Diagnostic and Statistic Manual 5, TR, has some updates with regard to complicated grief. This is a relatively new thing because these doctors that get together and make consensus over this book for diagnosis have looked at the fact that grief can be independent of sadness or low mood, also known as major depression, or adjustment disorder, which encapsulates or can encapsulate anxious thought and mood, depressive thought and mood. Now, this is where it gets a little bit sticky, and I'm not going to go into the weeds on that, but suffice it to say that what I really want you to know is that grief is its own special animal in terms of what we as therapists see in the therapy room and what people experience. Grief can show up in a couple of different kinds of contexts. First of all, we can grieve moving house, leaving friends and family when we go away to college, empty nest syndrome. Likewise, the student experiences this just in a slightly different way because it's a launching, it's something new, but it's not always exciting. Sometimes it's very sad because the things that once gave us comfort are miles away. But if we think about it in another context, loss. Loss of people, loss of things, I know when I had to put my Shasta down a year ago, it was devastating to me, deeply painful. I'd had Shasta for 10 years. She'd gone with me just about everywhere. I really fell in love with that little dog. And, she traveled with me from South Dakota to San Diego and back here to Michigan twice. Just a good girl. And, it was painful. But that pain also leaves an echo. And this is why I think understanding the system, but also understanding a little bit more about the way that the mind deals with loss, is something worth taking a look at from the perspective of psychology. Now, in my practice, even though I put Kubler-Ross down in the treatment plan, I recognize that, and I tell clients this. I'm a Doctor Who fan, so I tell clients it's like David Tennant said about time. It's wibbly wobbly, timey wimey. It's the kind of thing that it doesn't follow a linear logical progression. And even though there are stages in Kubler-Ross's book, it doesn't always show up that way. In fact, it's my experience over 10 years now of delivering therapy that there are people who really struggle more so with acceptance of loss than any other aspect of the loss. Now, it's painful for them not to have this person in their life, so please don't misunderstand and attribute something to me that I didn't say. But it seems that the focal point when clients come to see me is, I feel hollow. I feel empty. I will never have the opportunity to talk with this person next to me again and hear their response. I will never be able to feel this person sitting next to me, hug them, hold them, have that physical connection. Because if you think about it, we live in a kind of an interesting world. And I was listening to Chase Hughes yesterday in something that he talked about, and I think it's very true. We've kind of lost the art of connection. That wasn't what he said, but that was how I understood what he was talking about in his theory about our ancestors. I think it is chaotic to live in a time where we do this. We talk to each other over a screen. We talk to each other through a little box that we carry around. But the difficulty is it doesn't do anything to make the heart feel fully enlivened and connected. Now, something else that has been showing up a lot in my therapy room are people who are complaining that they're not able to find and make close friends. Now, I admit, in a lot of circumstances, they're wanting to make friends very quickly, which I can appreciate. We'd like to have people that we can go and do things with, feel connected to, be appreciated, share our story with. But that's much more difficult. So let me go back to James Joyce and talking about Finnegan's Wake. One of the brilliant things about Irish culture is that most people collect at the pub because it's a community center. It's where everybody goes, where everybody's seen. A lot of things happen there. And not all of them are about the drinking. It's mostly about community. It's about connecting. It's about being with the people who are a part of your community and spending time with them, meaningful time with them. Now, this is the part about the physical control of the mind that I think is so difficult, is because over the last 4 years, what a lot of people have learned is I talk about me, I don't want to hear about you. And the shame of that is that it makes it a lot harder for us to connect with people. Hence why we go into a state of grief. Because we're experiencing a sort of a shunning, maybe a rejection, or maybe we describe it as, why don't you like me? Why am I so bad? That's the question that I hear most often in my therapy room is, what did I do that's so bad that you don't like me? Or why don't you reach out to me? Why don't you want to spend time with me? Why don't you call me? And I had a couple of different thoughts on this, and I wasn't able to find really any research about this. I'm anticipating that's kind of on purpose, because I think we have a collective social problem. And that collective social problem is that we're grieving the fact that somehow we've just missed the cue on how to really be truly connected to people. Because a lot of the clients that I see are really lonely. Now, I'm going to point out, I mentioned that there are a couple of types of grief. I know people who have lost their children. I know that there are people who have lost their partners, who have lost people very, very close to them. People who meant a great deal to them. And, you know, a funny phrase that I started to hear when I got back here to Michigan was, "That's my ride or die friend," or "my ride or die partner," whatever the case may be, which I thought was kind of a fascinating statement to make, because how do you know? I mean, truly, how do you know that this person, no matter what, is going to put their own self interest aside to be there for you? You know, it's funny, talking about controlling the mind, people who experience the behaviors of anxious thought and mood and low thought and mood really can't seem to make the connection that they're exhibiting a significant amount of control of their physical mind, of the way that their mind is working. They're also deeply impacting their physiology because of the way that they're thinking. Now, this isn't a criticism, not by any stretch. Again, don't attribute something to me that I didn't say. What I'm saying is that without realizing it, they are creating this reality that says everything is trying to hurt me, and I'm really uncomfortable, and everything is painful. Because it just feels like, why get out of bed? A client told me, it feels like I want to pull the covers up over my head and never open my eyes again because it is so hard. And when I hear that, you know, it breaks your heart. Because this is somebody who has value, they have worth, and they can't see it. Because the story that they tell themselves is, I don't deserve to feel good. Somehow we get stuck in these stories, in these negative feedback loops, which is why I wanted to talk about the control of the physical mind. Because one of the things that Mr. Delgado talked about was pleasurable excitation in the brain, animal brains. A lot of neuroscience has been focused around anticipatory thought. When we're anticipating the worst, you know, the people who tell you that they're overthinkers and that they're convinced that everything in the world is going to heck in a handbag, or the people who are chronically sad. Sometimes low mood is something that is happening just beneath the surface. So is the anticipatory expectation or excitation. The brain doesn't understand the difference between getting really excited in a positive way and being excited in a negative way. So I often tell clients, go into a self-hug, look around the room. Are there any lions? Are there any tigers? Is anything currently right now in this moment trying to hurt you? Now, often people will chuckle at hearing a dragon and say no. But the unconscious mind needs to hear it. And then when I can invite them to get excited about the things that make them afraid, now they're taking a physical action. And I know it doesn't feel like it, but by taking the physical action, what they're doing is they're holding on to themselves, and they're telling themselves, there's nothing here that can hurt me. I get really excited about this. I love doing this. This is the best thing. And again, there's a ton of neuroscience research that says when we turn something, we flip it in this way, particularly anticipatory excitement, and we turn it into something that we're like, yeah. If you heard me talk before about me not wanting to get on a roller coaster down at Cedar Point, and then I went out to SeaWorld and I couldn't get off of it because I was enjoying it so much, that's the difference. That is the golden key. So when he talks about the pleasurable excitation of the animal brain, he says it's surprising that in science as well as in literature, more attention has been paid to suffering than to happiness. The central theme of most novels is tragedy. While happy books are hard to find, excellent monographs have been published about pains, but similar studies of pleasure are non-existent. Typically, the monumental Handbook of the American Physiological Society, a full chapter is devoted to pain, and pleasure is not even listed in the General Subject Index. Evidently, the pursuit of happiness has not aroused as much scientific interest as the fear of pain. This is why when we specifically decide to take action against the things that are troubling us, embracing the suck is what the Navy SEALs say. What they're really doing is they're building a muscle. Andrew Huberman talked about this a couple of months ago with David Goggins, and he talked about how it increases the brain's ability to overcome adversity and adapt. So now let me go back to Tim Finnegan's Wake. Now when I started to read that, obviously I'm stumbling over some archaic words. Again, it's kind of a transliteration, but it's also meant to excite the senses, be a little bit